Yeah, so I just want to say for everyone just joined now, we're starting the webinar today for ISO 14001 2026 transition timeline and next steps. I'll start off the webinar, go through the first couple of slides, and then we'll hand over to Richard, because Richard is the expert and I know nothing at all, so please don't rely on me. But for those who don't know, as Richard has moved the slide up for me, it's just to go through what NQA does. NQA is a certification body, a world-leading certification body that prioritizes a variety of different standards and sectors, as you can see from the slide there. Top 1, top 3, all the different elements there, so you can take that in your own time. And now I'm going to hand over now to Richard to speak about himself, and Richard will take over the rest of the webinar. And yeah, hand back to you, Richard.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon and welcome. Slight change how we do webinars. I guess I'll recognise a lot of names that are on the list. We're just about to break 600 people, which is fantastic. Clearly shows that there's a demand for some knowledge and some reflection on the changes. Those that have joined webinars of mine before will be surprised to actually see me this time. Normally, I just hide behind a set of slides. I was always told I had a face for radio. Maybe you can tell me otherwise. However, as I say, we've welcome this afternoon. A little bit about myself. I'm, as you can see with the slide, I'm NQA's Principal Assessor for Energy and Environment, or Environment and Energy. I've been at NQA for 18 years now. Prior to that, I worked for an environmental consultancy, which was part of the Groundwork Environmental Charity, and I worked there for 12 years providing training and consultancy to businesses in everything from environmental management implementation through to energy management and energy reviews. So my role, as you can see there, is to lead and develop technical knowledge within NQA and also within our client base, and indeed anybody else who cares to listen in, and also make sure that the skill base of our staff and assessors is at the cutting edge, if you like. So that's part of what we're going to be doing today, and that's a little bit about me, myself. So this webinar, just to make sure that you're in the right place, we are going to be looking at the changes to, or the proposed changes to ISO 14001 2026. We're going to look at what the suggested changes are from the 2015 version of the standard, the current version, a little bit about why those changes are going to take place, some key dates and expected transition timeline, how we can prepare for those changes, how we at NQA can support you with that, and a little bit at the end where Charles will come back and speak a little bit about some of the future transition training that we can offer. So just a little bit of housekeeping for the first point. Let me just move a couple of little things on my screen so that I can see things. First of all, there's no need for you to frantically write down everything that I'm saying. Everybody who's registered for the webinar will receive a copy of the slides, a PDF copy of the slides, and will also receive a link to a recording of this webinar. We record all our webinars, and in fact, if you were to go on to YouTube, that well-known video sharing site, and search for NQA, we do have an area on there where we post, again, all our webinars. So you can find this one, and you'll find any others that I and all my colleagues have delivered over the years. So there's no need to take notes. You will get copies of the slides, and you will get a link to a recording of this webinar. I might reiterate that a little bit later on because there are still people joining. As we go along then, if we have any questions, you should on the screen have a panel that will allow you to type questions in. I tend to suggest that you use the chat function. So if there's any questions that you've got on there, please type them into the chat panel. What I try and do on my webinars, if it's a question that I feel is relevant to answer at the time, so in other words, we haven't moved on to the next subject or the next part of the presentation, I'll try and answer it there and then. If not, we'll leave them towards the end, and there is a section at the end when we can have some question and answers. We don't open up the webinar for people to speak. You need to type your questions into the chat box, and we'll cover that. Just one word of caution. on anything that I'm going to say in this webinar. All of the information is based on the current draft international standard, what's known as the DIS, the Draft International Standard. That is subject to change. So this is a heads up really on what is expected, but it does not reflect the final requirements. They will be in the FDIS, and we'll look at the timeline shortly. So they will be in the FDIS, the final draft international standard. So at the moment, anything I'm about to tell you shouldn't be taken as the final version. It is subject to change. However, I'm not, from what I can gather, I'm not expecting any significant changes from what is in this presentation. So say if you have any questions as we go along, type them in the chat box and I'll try and respond either at the time or towards the end. So the timeline itself. So the current version of the standard, ISO 14001:2015, was published, I think it was 10 o'clock UK time on the 15th of September 2015. That standard replaced the 2004 version. So it seems that the standards for 14001 have been updated roughly every 10 years. The very first version of this is when I got into environmental management, was released in 1996, 30 years ago. So this is now the third iteration, or will be the third iteration. So the draft international standard, the version that we're working on just at the moment, has been around since early 2025, and a number of dates have been suggested for the publication of the final draft standard, and I've just noted a typo in my slide there. So maybe Charles, if you can remind me just to change that. The FDIS, it should say FDIS under the third row there. Final draft international standard. It was supposed to be out in October. There's not much left of October, and there's no sign of it yet. So we're expecting that to be out either late November or early December for the final draft standard. And the new standard now is expected to be published around about March 2026. Again, it was, I think, initially due to be January. That's been pushed back to March. Obviously, running in parallel with this is, and there'll be webinars on the other standard. ISO 9001 is also being updated. That will be several months behind. I think the expected published date for ISO 9001:2026 is September next year. So watch out for webinars coming up on that. That will probably start sometime early in the new year. The other thing that people are asking me already, and we don't know the definitive answer, is the transition deadline. So the transition for the 2015 version of the standard was 3 years, but that was deemed to be a significant change. This standard, it's sort of a moderate change. There are no fundamental changes. So whether it will be 3 years or not, we don't know. I think the IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, will be waiting to see what's in the FDIS before they give us guidance as certification bodies as to what the transition timeline will be. So at the moment, I'm basing it on what we did for the 2015 standard, which was a maximum of 3 years, which will take us to very early in 2029. So why are we changing the standard? This is only the second update, as I've just sort of alluded to. It's only the second update in over 20 years. And I think it's fair to say that the environmental landscape and our understanding of that landscape has changed in those 20 plus years. You know, I think back to sort of when I was helping businesses implement 14001, and then when I joined NQA in 2007, a lot of our time was spent looking in skips, looking down drains, looking at what was going up people's chimneys. It was all around aspects and impacts, waste, pollution. And I think the changes to the standard are starting to reflect the growing global priorities: climate resilience, biodiversity, sustainable resource use. And one of the things that the standard is trying to do is to strengthen that climate action and indeed our business resilience to changes in climate. This isn't a climate change webinar. I have done ones on those in the past as well, and you can go back and watch some of those if that's something that particularly interests you. But it's the changes to the standard are there to try and reflect these growing global priorities, like I said, climate resilience, biodiversity, sustainable resource use. It's also being designed to better align with what's called Annex SL, the ISO's harmonized structure for standards. So there's a couple of areas where they're aligning it in even better than it has been currently. A couple of new areas to concentrate on as well that have been taken from other standards. So we'll have a look at those. But ultimately, this is only the third update in 30 years to the environmental management standard. So it's probably overdue, if I'm being honest. And personally, I'm quite pleased to see that it is starting to better reflect some of these global environmental priorities. So whilst the changes are deemed to be moderate, they will enhance the following areas. So climate action and environmental resilience, as I've already mentioned, supply chain sustainability and due diligence, a greater emphasis on life cycle perspective through from design to disposal, a bit more enhanced thinking about risk-based approach throughout the whole of the management standard, and an extended or an expanded Annex A. Annex A is sort of the guidance contained within the standard to explain some of the contexts. There will be an expanded Annex A for some clearer implementation guidance. So what we're going to do now over the next sort of 20-25 minutes or so is to actually have a look at the clauses that are changing, and to have a look at what those new clauses are saying as per the draft standard, what the current thinking is, and what may have to be considered by yourselves in terms of bringing your existing 14,001 system into line with the new standard. So those are the clauses really that we're going to look at in detail. There are a couple of changes to some of the other clauses which we'll also cover, but those are the main areas where there are changes, and I won't read them out. You can see for yourselves what the headlines are, and we'll look at a little bit of the detail as we go through. So generally, one of the main changes as we go through the standard are some editorial changes, updating references, some restructuring of the standard, some renumbering, a couple of minor changes, and some additional points of clarification. So one of the things that's changing, it's trying to sort of bring the language more up to date, to bring the language more in line with current sort of compliance thinking. So the term now, the use of the term result as the term for the output of a process. So that's one of the things that the standard is now looking at. It's all becoming result-based, looking for the results of what it is that you are doing with the standard. The outcome remains the relevant term when we consider the whole EMS, and the outcome of the standard, every standard, whether it's quality, environment, health and safety, energy, they all have an expected outcome. And the expected outcome for 14,001 is an improvement in environmental performance. That still stays the same. So that outcome, but the individual parts of the standard, the individual clauses, will start to use the term result, and result being the expected outcome, if you like, but the term result is what's being used. And then a little bit of an additional terminology change includes changing the term fulfillment, which is in the current standard in terms of compliance obligations. Rather than fulfilling compliance obligations, it's using the word meeting. It may be just a change in wording, but it's trying to reflect current thinking in terms of legislation and how we have to meet the requirements of legislation rather than just fulfill them. So nobody's sent any questions in yet, which either means I bored you all to tears or you fully understand everything we've talked about. So I'm quite happy at the moment. I'm just going to carry on. Just a quick reminder that I am open to having questions asked if we get to any. It may be that the questions start to come in when we get to the next section, when we start to look at the clauses in a bit more detail.
Richard, actually, there are quite a few questions in the chat, by the way.
I can't see any. I can't see any. I don't know why I can't. My chat box is empty.
Oh no, they're all coming to the questions rather than the chat box.
Ah, right. Sorry, that's my. Okay, I did suggest that they went into the chat box. question. Ah, right, okay. So let me just move. Ah, I can see that now. Thank you. I can now see the changes. Somebody said there was no sound. I think that might be an issue at your end rather than ours. I'll come back to a lot of these questions a little bit later on. I think there's nothing that I would want to sort of answer just at the moment. I think we'll take some of those questions a little bit later on in the webinar. Somebody said they can't see a chat box. You maybe see a question box. If you want to use that, I can now see everything. Right, sorry about that. A little bit of housekeeping at our end. So back in the room. So we'll start with clause 4. So obviously the standard itself has a number of clauses. There are 10 clauses in all the standards. Clauses 1, 2, and 3 are the non-auditable clauses. Clause 4 to 10 are the clauses that we would expect to look at as a certification body, and also the clauses that actually start to have requirements for you as part of having the management system in place. So clause 4.1, and we'll go through the clauses clause by clause. So one of the changes in clause 4.1 is a much more formal requirement to the updates that were introduced in February 2024. So you should all remember that just over a year or a year and a half ago now, there were some changes brought in to the standards, in fact, across all of the standards, not just 14,001, requiring consideration of environmental conditions, including climate change, pollution, and biodiversity. Those were put in as an added clause, but in the new standards, and it will be the same in the 9001 standard, those have now been formally included in clause 1, which is the context. And the context is asking us to think a little bit about what is it in the world that can impact our ability as a business or an organization to meet the expected outcome of the standard. Remember that being improvement in environmental performance. I always say it's about looking at the things that are going to help you and looking at the things that are going to get in the way. So it's asking for a much deeper thought about those environmental factors and making sure that we've considered those in our business context and move them onwards into our risks, opportunities, aspects, and impacts. There is then a greater requirement for consideration of a life cycle perspective. So in other words, where are we buying our raw material from? How are we dealing with that? How are we using that? What resources are we using? And then onwards into maybe the use, working with our clients. So it's a greater life cycle perspective. The standard is still not expected to require a formal life cycle analysis, but it is asking for a much greater consideration in the upstream and downstream impacts of our organization. Bearing in mind, it's the things that we can control or influence. If we can't control or influence something, then we don't have to, we can't do anything about it. But it's making sure that we look upstream and downstream to make sure we can control or influence those things and what degree of control or influence we may have. Clause 4.2, which is needs of interested parties. Again, it expands on the requirements that were brought in the February 2024 editions, and that was to say that some of our interested parties may also have climate change, environmental requirements, considerations. So it's making sure that we do formally recognise that some of our stakeholders will have sustainability requirements. Somebody just asked a question, will 4.1 directly reference life cycle? Yes, it will. It will say that it will talk about consideration of a life cycle perspective. It won't be demanding. What would it look like in practice? If I'm honest, I haven't time to actually go through that. I think somebody may have joined slightly later. Somebody asking, will you get a copy of the slides? Yes, I will. We'll cover that shortly. But you will get copies of the slides. Just reiterate that for people who maybe joined late. You'll also get a link to a recording of this webinar. Okay, so just to summarize on clause 4.2, you will need to review and update stakeholder lists and needs to make sure that you have covered any requirements from your stakeholders around sustainability, climate change, pollution, and diversity. Moving on to clause 5, the update on leadership. Not a significant change. However, there is likely to be a slightly amended emphasis on ethical leadership and full accountability by what the standard calls sort of top management, senior management, and making sure that there is responsibility at the head of the organization for the fostering of a culture of sustainable development. And leadership will need to have a more visible role in embedding sustainability principles into operations. I've audited companies in the past. It's a story I've told a number of times, where I once audited a business who shall remain nameless, where I talked to the managing director about his commitment, and his answer was, yes, of course I'm committed, I've signed the policy and I get the minutes from the management review. That is not an acceptable answer, and it is, this term leadership, which was brought in the 2015 standard, is being expanded, and a slightly more visible expansion of leadership. And it's also likely to require top management to support all organizational roles and not just management. I think the current standard talks about leadership supporting management. It's extending the level of personal involvement of our leaders into supporting staff wherever they may be, wherever they may sit within the organization. Right, moving on again. So clause 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities. So again, this is a section that has had quite a number of changes, suggested changes. It has been restructured for clarity. So 6.1.1 was a general statement. That's now been moved to clause 6.14. What was 6.14, which is planning actions, has now been renumbered as clause 6.15, and maybe in answer to some of the questions that have already been answered, a new note is being added in clause 6.12, which better explains what the standard means by life cycle perspectives. But the section on risks and opportunities, now remember, the risks and opportunities are not aspects and impacts. Risks and opportunities are the things that we identified in clause 4.1 under context. So there's a greater emphasis, again, across the value chain. Probably don't need to explain to you what the value chain is, but there's just a few notes, a little bit of a graphic at the bottom there to show that it goes through from design, procurement, production, use, and ultimately disposal. Now that obviously reflects a manufacturing organization, but equally well service organizations do also have value chains. So that's clause 6.1. A new clause is 6.3. So 6.3 has introduced a clause that it's pinched, if you like, from ISO 9001. ISO 9001 2015 has a specific clause in there covering the management of change management. So this clause has been imported into ISO 14001, so it is a formal clause where there will need to be a structured approach within the business, within the organization, to managing environmental change. Change being regulatory change to compliance obligations, operational adjustments that may be made as a result of changing environmental legislation, changing environmental requirements, or indeed technological or process shifts, how we adapt our processes or our technology. If you've already got ISO 9001 and you're working with an integrated system, you should be on top of this clause. But if you're working solely on 14001, it may be new, but it's asking you to think about, yes, I agree. Sorry, somebody just said it's planning of change, not the management of change. Maybe, I guess, so maybe some of that technology, maybe some of that terminology might change. But definitely, it's a section in there on change management. I think planning and management go hand in hand. So yes, it's about how we manage change, required changes within our organization, but it is in there now as a formal clause, and it's something that as part of a certification visit you would be expected to detail to your assessor on what systems, what processes you have in place for managing change related to how the business organization works environmentally. Clause 7. So clause 7, only minor adjustments. So clause 7 is all about support. One of the changes that's suggested is that communication must empower employees to contribute to continual improvement. Now, for those of you that might have ISO 45001 or indeed ISO 50001, so health and safety or energy management systems in place, there is a formal requirement in both of those standards for a mechanism for employee feedback, employee suggestions in terms of improving health and safety, improving energy management. It's not certain whether it will be as formal as those two standards, but communication must empower. There must be the ability for people working for us, working with us, to contribute, to make their suggestions to how as a business we can continually improve. However, the majority of this clause stays the same, and it's just making sure that there is alignment with changes in terminology throughout the whole of the standard, because clause 7 partly is about awareness and communication. So it may reflect other parts of the standard where we change some of the terminology, but it's making sure that we make this information available within the business. We're not expecting a huge change other than that empowerment of employees contributing to continual improvement. Clause 8 is operations. Within the current standard, there's only two clauses, 8.1 and 8.2. 8.1 being operational control and 8.2 being emergency preparedness. One of the expectations is that supply chain pressures for management of environmental issues will increase. So at the moment, clause 8.1 in the current standard talks about outsourced processes. And there's always been a little bit of a debate about what an outsourced process is. That terminology is being changed to control of externally provided processes, products and services. So again, that's bringing us back into a life cycle approach. And we will be expected to have a little bit more, maybe influence, maybe not necessarily control. We can't necessarily control our externally provided products and services, but a lot more thought given to how we work with our suppliers, our contractors, in terms of environmental management. And again, life cycle perspective embedded throughout operational planning. And then finally, emergency situations to be identified when considering risks and opportunities. Generally, emergency situations, certainly in clients that I audit, tend to think about emergencies around environmental aspects and impacts, spillages, things leaking, waste not being managed as correctly. So that type of emergency situation. Clause 8.2 is going to widen that scope and to talk about the risks and opportunities. So there may be emergency situations that relate to climate type issues, not just our own environmental aspects and input. So we need to widen the scope of our clause 8.2 responses, if you like, to emergency situations. Moving on, clause 9, a couple of changes within clause 9. Internal auditing, there will be now an explicit requirement to evaluate environmental performance and the effectiveness of the EMS, environmental management system. You may say that's already in there, and I think again it was an area that was alluded to within the current standard, but again it's being a lot more specific, a lot more explicit, that there is a requirement as part of the internal audit process to evaluate the environmental performance and effectiveness of the areas being audited. And to help with that, individual internal audits will now have to have defined objectives in addition to what is the scope and criteria of the audit. So quite often we'll see a process audit that might say we're going to do an internal audit on a particular area of our business. That's fine, that's auditing, that's telling us what the scope and criteria for the audit is. There will then need to be an additional piece of information that says that this audit will have the following objectives. the standard doesn't tell you what those objectives are. That's for you to decide, but audits will have to have, as part of the planning process, defined objectives. Moving on to the other change, the significant change within clause 9.3. So 9.3 being the management review, and it's been reorganized into 3 subclauses. So inputs into the management review, the process itself, and then the results. I think currently it talks about inputs and outcomes. The new standard will talk about inputs to the review. What do we need to consider? Where does the information come from? What is the review process itself? And then it's much more results focused. What are the results of our management review? And the information requirements review, so the things that need to be included, are much more definitive. I think previously they were a little bit woolly, and now the term shall has been included. So it's not a case of we're going to, these are the things that you might want to look at. If the standards say shall, then they will have to be included in the management review process. This is all about improving the structure and the traceability of things that are discussed, and particularly the results coming out of our management review. The final clause that we're going to look at is clause 10. So clause 10.1 has been removed, and its content integrated into clauses 10.2 and 10.3. But what it's doing, it's streamlining the approach to non-conformities and corrective action, reinforcing root cause analysis. So in other words, why has whatever happened? Why has it happened? Rather than just looking at short-term corrective action. And it's reinforcing the link between audit findings, so a clearer linkage between things coming out of clause 9, so internal audit findings, and indeed things coming out of the management review, and improving that linkage between things at clause 9 and then the continual improvement bit at clause 10, bearing in mind this additional requirement of root cause analysis. Just a couple of quick questions people say. Like, somebody says that they can't hear what's going on. As I say, I'm guessing most of you can, so that must be a problem at their end. The question is, will a recording be available? Yes, it will. You may not have heard that if obviously you can't hear what I'm saying. So just to reinforce again, excuse me, there will be a copy of the slides and also a recording of the webinar made available. So just to sort of summarize, so terminology updates include replacing fulfill with meet compliance obligations. That's one of the key changes. And some executive engagement. So the standard was placing a much greater emphasis on, from leadership from the top, on conserving natural resources, protecting ecosystems, requiring organizations to revise policies and ensure that there is executive engagement. And Annex A is going to provide expanded guidance on a lot of these areas. So to prepare for the transition, obviously the sooner you start the better. I wouldn't start just yet. I'd maybe think about some of the things I've said, maybe start to examine some of the sections within your own systems, start to think about what some of these changes may be, but bear in mind the caveat that I started with, that this entire presentation is based on the draft standard, and it's not until the final draft standard comes out in December, hopefully, that we can start to make formal plans. However, so review your current EMS. One of the things that definitely isn't going to change is the inclusion of a stronger focus on climate, sustainability, and supply chain considerations. That isn't going to change. Making sure to start to think about the wording in your environmental policies to make sure that there is a revised focus on sustainability. Start to look at stakeholder and risk registers, what's in them. Are you specifically looking at the sustainability, environmental needs of stakeholders and indeed identified risks under clause 6.1? Think about the life cycle of whatever it is your business carries out, whether it's a service industry, whether it's manufacturing. You will need to demonstrate that you've looked both upstream and downstream in terms of those practices. Make sure that the internal audit and management review processes are obviously robust, but start to think about, maybe now when you're thinking about doing an internal audit, have a think about what it is you're trying to actually achieve. What are the expected outcomes from your internal audit? What are the objectives of the audit? Think about root cause analysis as part of that process. It's something we do. If we raise a finding on one of our external audits, and we leave you a non-conformance form to complete, you have to demonstrate that you've looked at the root cause analysis, and based on that root cause analysis, then what is the longer term corrective action. But also, the biggest tip I could probably give you is to engage your senior leadership as early as possible. To let them know that this is coming, make sure that they understand what their role is going to be in these standards and the updates. So keep in contact with your certification body. Hope you're all with NQA. If you're not, we'd love to talk to you. Keep in close contact with your certification body. We will be offering information and support for the transition process, as we did in 2015. I managed NQA's transition process for the 2015 standard. I'll be managing the process for this standard as well, making sure that our own staff are up to speed, and also making sure that you guys have all the tools that you need to be able to manage this. But by adopting the changes, we're making sure that you can position yourselves as leaders in environmental stewardship. That's what the standard is all about. Meeting stakeholder expectations and driving some long-term value in what is an increasingly sustainability focused world. Couple of very, very quick summaries then. So a stronger focus on environmental conditions, clearer expectations to identify and consider environmental conditions, climate change, biodiversity, etc., etc. A new clause for managing change. If you've got 9001, you're already there, but it is based on that clause within 9001, but a formal requirement to plan and manage changes that can affect the management system, the environmental management system. And it's intended to make sure that any changes are intentional, that you've evaluated those changes, and any changes you're making to activities are aligned with your environmental objectives. The language of the standard has been brought up to date. Terminology has been refreshed to improve alignment with maybe other standards. Because some of the other standards, so 45,001, 50,001, were only updated in 2018. So some of those have got slightly different language. So we're trying to make sure that there is similar language across all of the standards. Fulfill compliant obligations become meet. Maintain documented information becomes available as documented information, and outsourced processes becomes externally provided processes, products and services. A lot of those editorial changes don't introduce new requirements, but will need to be reflected within systems and documentation. Clause 6 has been restructured for clarity. That's the planning clause. But overall, if there is one sort of key overriding message on all of this, is that the new 14,001 will have a much stronger connection to sustainability. And top management will be expected to play and to demonstrate that they're playing a more visible role in promoting environmental and sustainability performance. So I think that's all I'm going to say just at the moment. I'm going to hand back to Charles, who I think is going to take us through the next couple of slides before we then spend probably 15-20 minutes looking at some of the questions that have been posed. I certainly can't answer them all because there's a load of them, but we'll go through as to what we can possibly answer. So Charles, over to you.
Amazing. Richard, thank you very much for your time there. That was really, really informative. And we've seen about now probably 10,000 questions in the chat, all very interesting things as well. So I'll let you have a look through those while we talk through the training. Actually, I've answered some of the questions in the chat actually about that training. So I'll just give you a little run through of what to expect. So first of all, we will have an e-learning on the new changes. This will be to the FDIS rather than to the DIS as well. So you'll have that. So check that out. We would like to get that out maybe before the end of the year, hopefully, but that will be out earlier. And then you also have 2 other transition courses, a 1-day transition course and a 2-day lead auditor transition course. These courses will look in more detail in terms of actually being more tutor-led. So not an e-learning where you do your own space and time, but with a tutor who will understand the changes, understand the requirements, and actually can go through and how those changes and have actual practical changes to your organization as well. So yeah, so check those out as you come through. Those hopefully will come out sort of hopefully about March, April time. So check that out. So those are the 3 courses we have there. And in addition to that, we also offer all of the existing 14,001 courses. But those courses are on the 2015 version, like the introduction, implementation, all that now will be transitioned to the 2026 version as well. So if you think about doing those courses next year, they will be updated and you'll have access to those when you can see them. But what I will do now actually is I will actually, in the next couple of minutes or so, I'm going to put into the actual chat a link to our registration of interest. And this basically is NQA's opportunity to, if you want to sign up for more information about the 14,001 transition, sign up there and you get nice little sort of information about these changes come through in the next couple of months, such as the FDIS and when this is launched as well. So I'll put that in chat in a couple of
One of the things, actually, Rowan's just sent me a message. One of the things that we may well do, and I think we did this previously on the previous transition, we're not going to answer all these questions in the next 15 minutes. What we did before was to take the questions and turn them into a blog. So I think that's something that we'll do ourselves internally. We'll have a look at the questions, pull out if there's any recurring themes, and if you keep an eye on our website, then we'll put them into a blog that will try and answer some of those questions as well, because we're not going to get through them all before 2 o'clock or whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. We're not going to get through them all in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So keep an eye on that and we'll convert the questions into a blog.
Amazing. Perfect. No, but yeah, please put the questions to the chat as well. So perfect. And just to summarize here as well, you can see here all the other different certification and training services that NQA does provide. Obviously, as mentioned before, obviously discussed about environment today, but this links in also sustainability, quality, things we mentioned before, and a variety of other standards all interlinked together. And Richard, can you just go to the next slide for me, please? That'd be very helpful. Perfect as well. And just as said before, if you want any further support, there's multiple ways to get in contact with us. Give us a call, the number there. Send an email to training@nqa.com for information there. But you can also connect with us on LinkedIn, our website on the right there as well. And as Richard already said, we'll sort of compile all the different questions from today into a blog, and then that way we can then use this as a resource as well. And we'll put that on our blogs and resources at NQA.
Okay, so in the next 15 minutes, I shall try and get through as many of the questions as I can. I've gone right back to the beginning. So, oops, what's happened there? There we go. If we, so I'll start with the questions that came in, and I'll look. I may have answered some of them, but I'll go through them sort of one at a time. Is the current DIS, Draft International Standard, available for downloading? Yes, it is. We can't supply it. You need to go to ISO for that standard, but you can get that. That was a question. Will the text of the DIS or the FDIS be available prior to publication? Well, the DIS is available now. You can download it as a standard. You have to buy it from ISO. If I'm being brutally honest, I think it wouldn't add any value to buying the DIS. I would wait until the FDIS is published hopefully in December. And look to see then if obviously you can buy that from BSI, either BSI or ISO. We do not have the ability to supply standards themselves. Does it incorporate the IAF communique on the considerations of climate change published in February 2024? Yes, it does, and I think I've explained that in the standard itself. So it has incorporated those considerations. They are now formally incorporated into the standard. Will we receive a certificate of attendance? Sadly not. We don't issue certificates of attendance for webinars. It's not a formal training event. But there's no reason why you couldn't include details that if you are wanting to log your CPD, you could certainly reference this, but we don't provide certificates of attendance. Could I please take an example and help understand the difference between fulfillment and meeting regulatory requirements? Not really, because there's so many different areas. I think what we mean, I think it's trying to be a little bit more, what's the word, explicit in terms of using that term. I think fulfillment and meeting are very similar, but I think meeting is saying you have to do exactly what the legislation states. Fulfillment, I think, is perhaps a little bit woolly and gives maybe a little bit of wriggle room, but I think what the standard is saying is that if a piece of legislation either says you have to do something or prohibits you from doing something, there's no wriggle room. You have to meet those regulatory requirements. You have to do what they say. So I think it's just a little bit more explicit. Can we have access to the new draft standard? I've explained, yeah, we can't supply that. You will need to get that. My company will be certified next year in March 2026. Should we look at the new ISO or can we wait? That's entirely up to you. Depends on what the transition says, but normally within the 3-year transition period, there is a cut-off point. So certainly for the first 12 months, if not more, new certifications will still be possible to the old 2015 standard. That's how it worked for 2015. So for the first year, you could still be certified if it was a new certification to the old standard. From that point onwards, then all new certifications had to be to the new standard, but there was still a bit of time for an actual transition for people with an existing certificate. So I think the question there would be, it's up to you and to speak to your own certification body. I don't know whether that's NQA or not, but I think you need to liaise with your own certification body and work out what they would suggest is the best way forward. Will you still be able to integrate 14,001 and 9,001 so you can run as an integrated system and audit as such? Absolutely, 100%. One of the questions I anticipate, rather disappointingly, the two standards 14,001 and 9,001 are not being released at the same time. In 2015, they were released at the same time, so people with an integrated standard, integrated system, knew what to expect. This time, 9,001 is probably 6 or 7 months behind. My advice, it's only my personal advice, because of the length of the transition period, if you are running an integrated system, I would probably wait until both standards have been published, or certainly till both FDISs are out, so that you can actually see what the changes are, because I would hate to suggest that you change something in 14,001 that might have a knock-on effect in 9. So Greg, if I was you, yes, you can integrate, but I would be inclined to maybe just hold fire until 9,001 is at least at the FDIS stage. Will 4.1 directly reference life cycle? We believe so. What would it look like in practice? I haven't got time to go into what a life cycle looks like. Basically, in a nutshell, it's asking you to look upstream and downstream from where your business sits and look at the things that you can control or influence in terms of environmental management. Obviously, there's things that you can't change. You can't control things, but you have the ability to choose who you buy products from. You have the ability to choose who you buy services from, and it will be asking you to look at how and where, what is the process that you might have for making sure that the products or services you're buying in are as sustainable as possible. Will terms and definitions be updated? I assume so. Would it be worthwhile conducting a life cycle analysis? It's always worthwhile conducting one. It certainly wouldn't be a waste of time, but it's up to you. The standard doesn't mandate it, but if you wanted to do a formal life cycle analysis, it certainly won't be a wasted opportunity. Will format of the environmental risk assessment changed? The standard doesn't really, well, standard does require risk assessment. It's entirely up to you how you do things. The standard tells you what you have to do, not how you have to do it. So if you have a way of carrying out an environmental risk assessment, that's entirely up to you. Part of our role as a certification body is to identify whether what you've come up with meets the requirements of the standard. A couple of things that are a bit of repetition. And we include our environmental context into our quality context, of course. If you've got an integrated standard, integrated system rather, you can have one document that covers both contexts. And indeed, if you look at 9001, the IAF requirements in adding sustainability and climate change sit there in 9001. So actually, yes, you should. This update means that it will be more aligned with the CSRD directive about sustainability. Obviously, the standard is all about improving sustainability. So the standard will better align with any of the other crossovers. The next question was about past 2080. Is there an emphasis, you know, if there's an emphasis, I can only see, I can't see all life cycle. It won't cross over. It will help. It will, they will have similar requirements. Somebody made the point it's the planning of change, not the management of change. I'm not so sure. It's not just about planning to do things. It will also be making sure that change is managed. Where are we? What have we got left? I'm just looking. There's a lot of crossover. Is an overlap with B Corp requirements again as the standard becomes more sustainable, more sustainability focused. Yes, there will be crossovers, I've said, with any of the sustainability requirements, any of the sustainability standards. Can I share the definition clarification on the standards view on life cycle perspective? Not at the moment. If you need to do that, you'll need to get a copy of the standard. If I was you, I'd wait for the FDIS. Obviously, there is a little section in there on sort of an improved definition on life cycle, but I've sort of given you, I've alluded to what that is. It's about looking upstream and downstream. The important thing to remember with life cycle, it's asking you to look at the things that you can control or influence. That's the main thing to think about. Environmental objectives for all employees, senior management or the company. Yes. You've covered them all there. Absolutely. Employees, senior management, across the whole thing. Relevant objectives need to be set at all different levels within the organisation. Is it a reasonable assumption that the 9001/2026 will also require internal audits have defined objectives? I think it is a reasonable assumption, yes, because this is all again part of the Annex SL. So I think quite rightly, if you've got 9001, it will have the same requirement. I don't know for certain. I do have obviously I'm not involved in the transition for 9001, but I think it's a fair assumption that it will be in there. Do you know if climate and biodiversity risk assessments will need to be carried out, or is it just a consideration? Again, the standard tells you what you have to, it will be considered. I think the terminology used is consideration. I don't think it said take into account. So there is a difference between consideration and taking into account. As far as I'm aware, at the moment, it is still saying consider, but that could change. Now, hello, I've been looking to have my staff trained on 14,001 and 9,000, but is it worth training done on the current version for a better understanding or wait for the released updated 26? I would follow the information that Charles has mentioned. I would wait to just see till the FDIS comes out and have a look at maybe some of our training and look at some of our materials, some of our information on the new standard. I would hate to spend time developing training for a business to then say, well, actually, this is all subject to change.
Yeah, and briefly that, Richard, so just expand on that. Yeah, it depends really on how quickly you want training. If you want training now, like tomorrow, then it might be beneficial, but at least for 14,001, it's going to come up pretty soon, so there's no point. But 9,001 might be a bit of a wait, so it depends how quickly you want to go in that regard. But I defer to what Richard said in terms of like, you don't want to do it twice. That would be
don't do it twice. Don't do it twice. Really, just for the sake of a couple of months, I would wait till the FDIS comes out. there will be an updated webinar. There's another similar webinar to this planned for January, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that if the technical committee that's writing this stuff gets the FDIS out in time, that the webinar that we deliver in January, mid-January, will be to the FDIS. And I shouldn't say this, but I will. Obviously, there will be slides from that. There is nothing to stop you using those slides. Obviously, I'm quite happy that you take the slides, and if you wish to amend those into an internal presentation, feel free to do that. Obviously, I would say, just if you're going to use somebody else's material, at least give them a little bit of credit for doing it. There is still a requirement for independent internal audits using a process-based approach? Absolutely. That is still the case. That hasn't changed. That internal audit should ideally have a process-based approach. If a recertification audit is due in 2027, would the recert be completed against the 2026 standard? That's up to you. You can choose. Again, I defer back to the question or the answer I gave earlier. I would liaise with your certification body to work out exactly what is appropriate to your business. Again, is the DIS, is it downloadable? It is at a cost from ISO or possibly BSI. I think we're getting towards the end. There's quite a bit of repetition. Is this likely to require an additional transition day? We don't know, is the answer. It did for the 2015 standard because that was deemed to be a significant change. For this standard at the moment, we're waiting for advice. Nobody knows. If I'm honest, I suspect it will, but don't take that as read. As soon as we know the answer, we'll let you all know. I think I'm going to leave it at that. We're a couple of minutes short of the hour. I think I've answered the main themes. Do we do an ISO 14001 internal audit course? I think we do. That's Charles is nodding. I think that came up on the screen. For budgetary purposes, what's the cost of each of the 3 new courses? Please engage with our training team and they will be able to give you all of that details. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. If there's anything else, we'll just watch out for our maybe a blog to cover some of the other things. You can always as well email training@nqa.com, who will maybe also be able to pass on any questions that you may have to me. I guess a number of you will also have my specific email address. I'm not going to give it out to over 600 people, but you can probably guess what it is. But those of you that deal with me on a regular basis, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have if you want to come to me individually. Charles.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Richard. Yeah, we will just to reiterate, we'll compile the questions together into an article, into a blog, and provide answers to those questions as well. So about another 2,000 questions, Richard, probably will have waiting to ask if you stay for another couple of hours. So, but I want to say thank you for your time, Richard. It was a really, really good webinar. I think you've hopefully given at least 600 people, 600 plus people, some clarity of what these changes will come for next year. So thank you very much for your time.
All the best, and as I said, maybe catch up with you all at some time on a future webinar. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and again, catch up with you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely day. See you in a bit. Bye-bye.